Hi, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you showing up today. My name is Jim McCarthy. I'm a leadership consultant, and thank you very much, Latino Startup Alliance, for having me present here at the first annual Latino Startup Alliance Innovator Summit. What we're going to do is, first of all, just kick it off. So there's a CEO, and she turned to me and she said, I have no freaking idea how to hire business people. I don't know what questions to ask, I don't know how to evaluate them, I don't know what things I should be talking about in job interviews. And this was a very brilliant woman who had a PhD in the technology area from a top university. She had been funded by top venture capitalists here in Silicon Valley. And nonetheless, she had no idea how to really properly hire and evaluate business people, because her background was more in technology than in business. Well, fortunately, she had hired me, and I have quite a bit of background in hiring and building great teams, which is part of what we're going to be talking about today. So really briefly about my background, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Yo pasé un verano en Cuernavaca, en México, en 1989, estudiando español. Después viví en España durante 2 años. Trabajé como periodista de economía en Madrid y vení aquí a California después. And that will be all the Spanish I'm doing in this presentation, but I figured I should show a little bit of it since I've worked so hard to learn it over the years. So other than that, after being a business journalist in Madrid, I got my MBA at Stanford. I've worked in companies ranging in size from 10 people to 15,000 people in various levels of growth, including companies like Yahoo. I went to Yahoo in 1997 as employee 258. Then later went on to a few of the other companies that are listed here. I've worked as a hiring manager building teams for different sorts of roles: product management, marketing, sales, business development, operations, finance, engineering. I've done this in Silicon Valley. I've done this in Omaha, Nebraska. I've done it in London. When I was working for Yahoo, I was doing international rollouts, including in Latin countries in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Spain. And so what I want to do today is sort of share some of these experiences I've had in terms of building great teams. What I do right now, by the way, I'm a leadership consultant, which means that I help companies, I teach companies how to build great teams. So a lot of what we're covering today is a very high-level view of some of the things that I specialize in. How to hire great people, how to set them up for success, how to be a leader and a manager for the first time, because lots of people in Silicon Valley suddenly they find themselves managing people they've never managed before. And all this leads to great retention, building great teams, hitting your goals, and growing your business. Now, so for today's agenda, how to build high-performance teams, we've got hiring, the process for success, some Q&A in here. We've got leading in terms of setting up people for success, more helpful information on how you can get that from me. There's a Q&A session at the end as well, and then have some feedback forms. Okay, so let's get started. So regarding hiring and the whole process for success, I've got some principles in terms of the whole process that should be useful, and then we're going to talk about different aspects of hiring, from scoping to sourcing to evaluating to closing. Scoping being defining the role, sourcing being getting resumes for the candidates that we're going to be looking at, evaluation, which is in terms of how to figure out whether you want to hire someone or not, and then closing, so once you actually make an offer for them, are you able to bring them on board? Now let's go into the whole process for it's just some of the major principles for the process. So first of all, you need to orchestrate very carefully. The word orchestrate, I hope you can see that there. So orchestrate very carefully means you need to have a very clearly defined process from end to end. Who's on the interview team? Who's asking what questions? What's the timing for this? When does it have to happen? Getting this all very well orchestrated, running like a well-oiled machine is really important. Now, also you need to be thorough but fast. And both of these concepts are important. So thorough meaning going through the proper questions, doing a very rigorous evaluation of the candidate, drilling down really deep to make sure that they are successful in the role, that there's a good match. But also you need to be fast. And I remember I was hiring for an optimization analyst role at a company called Blue Lithium, which was a startup. This is in 2007. I got the resume of a woman on a Monday. She was just graduating from Stanford. We brought her in on a Tuesday, interviewed her on a Wednesday and a Thursday, made a job offer for her on a Thursday. She accepted on a Friday. which was a good thing because she was otherwise going to take a job at a financial services company that coming Monday. So we had to move very quickly. Turned out to be a phenomenal hire. She did great work, had a great career. None of that would have happened if we hadn't been moving super fast. But we're also very thorough, right? We're very rigorous in terms of following all of our processes for doing really good interviewing. So that's thorough but fast. The other point here is in terms of selling here. So there are times when a candidate definitely has to sell themselves to you. They need to persuade you of why they're going to be great at the job. Similarly, there are going to be times when you need to persuade them that yours is a great company to work at. You need to persuade them that there's great opportunities, that they can learn, that they can grow, they can do a great job. So always be aware of that when you need to be selling them and when they need to be selling you. All right, now let's go on to defining the role. So in terms of defining the role, this is under scoping, okay? So under defining the role, you want to be really clear about as many aspects of the role as you can before you start looking to fill that role. So by that I mean, what is the title? What's the compensation? Who are they going to be reporting to? Whose team are they on? What are their daily responsibilities going to be? Is travel involved? Can they work from home? Or is it okay if they're in one office half the time and another office the other time? So all of that is really really important in defining the role. And I've seen very, very smart people who don't get this stuff figured out in advance, and then 6 months later someone has to quit the job because the expectations were not at all what they thought in terms of what the role really was going to be. So define the role as much as you can, and then this will help in terms of writing the job description, right? And there's people, and if the people say in startups, you know, I don't know exactly, the role's going to change, you have to wear a lot of hats, that's okay, but still it's important to force yourself to think in as much detail as you can about what that role is. And if it's going to change in 6 months, you start doing this and then you're doing something like else, then that's okay too, but at least be clear about that. Okay, now this is a fairly hectic slide, but the idea here is in terms of sourcing is getting resumes for those candidates, okay? Now, basically you've got different sources here, you know, for getting resumes, you know, venture capitalists and investors, LinkedIn, different schools and universities, the company website, recruiters, hackathons, meetups. All of this goes in terms of getting the resumes needed in order to have a successful process. And this is sort of like the hiring funnel here. Resume review, phone screens, face-to-face interviews, offers, and then hopefully you've got a new hire. Okay. Now, in a situation of talent abundance, you're going to have a lot of people seeking one job or 2 openings, okay? And that's a great position to be in because there's just a lot of demand for that position. You can be very picky. Other times in a situation of talent scarcity, like if you're trying to hire a really talented software engineer here in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley, then you have to be really working hard in order to get enough candidates to interview. And then honestly, sometimes you just hire whoever you can. It might be like one candidate, but at least they're good enough to hire. So, but in a situation of talent scarcity, ideally you have as many choices as you can about as many people as you can. And where that comes is from filling that funnel as much as possible, right? There's the traditional things of LinkedIn and different job boards, universities, but also hackathons, meetups, networking, everything is possible to get in front of as many people as you can. All right. Also under sourcing, I'd say recognize transferable skills. Now, why do I have a picture of dogs playing cards here? Other than that dogs are cute animals? Well, it reminds me of a guy that I once hired. I was there at Blue Lithium. I had this online internet advertising optimization team. And we needed to hire another analyst. And I got the resume of a guy who was in the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas, which is interesting. I don't have to play poker, but I can admire anyone who's really good at that. But it turns out that he also had a degree in chemical engineering from Berkeley. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a very smart, quantitative guy. And I brought him in, interviewed him, and he had a great mind for numbers and a great intuition for numbers and was very quantitative. And we hired him and he did a phenomenal job. Now, normally you would not think a person with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Berkeley is going to be exactly who you would think would be great in online advertising optimization. He had no business background whatsoever. But I realized that he had the quantitative skills which would have been great in this job, and it turns out that he did a phenomenal job there. So always recognize transferable skills, especially in a situation of talent scarcity, where you're looking for talented people who maybe have a different background than what you exactly were looking for that role, but it happens that they can fill the role very well. Okay, this slide says will versus skill that you want to keep in mind. I'm assuming this guy did not fall to his death here above the waters. So will versus skill is basically, when we think of skill, we think of as a person qualified for the role. Do they have the proper education? Do they have the proper training? Do they have the proper experience? And that's important, absolutely. But will is important too. And I've been in board of directors meetings at successful companies where there's a candidate who had great skills for the job, but he wasn't hired because he did not have the right will. He did not seem hungry enough, excited enough, passionate enough about what we're doing. And so when you're looking for will versus skill, ideally you've got both. Honestly, I would rather have a B player who is just incredibly passionate about what he's doing or what she's doing, very passionate about the mission of the company, the vision of the company, where they want to go, why they care about this. Maybe there's some sort of personal thing about it. I'd rather have that person than a person who's a player but who's lazy, right? Because an A player who's lazy thinks they know it all, can't be managed very easily, can't be coached very easily, and honestly, a person like that can be a real problem on the team. So think about will versus skill. And there's lots of interviewing questions that you can use, which will go into ascertaining kind of where the passion is and where the will is for that person. Moving on. So regarding the message here, of course, we have the open kimono, right? So I use this as a metaphor for being transparent. And by transparent, I mean being really clear and upfront with the candidate in terms of what the role really entails, right? So if it's a role where you're a startup and people are working 80 hours a week and you're expected to be available for conference calls on Saturday afternoons, and you're expected to be available for conference calls or even leading conference calls on Sunday evenings if things are breaking, or you need to hop on a plane and do an overnight to New York City for business the next day, if that's part of the work in order to be successful as the company, then you need to be really clear with the candidate who's interviewing to make sure that they're aware that this is what's expected, that it's part of the company culture. Be as transparent as possible, because if you're not, then you can say all sorts of nice things to bring someone in the door and get them to start working for your company. But afterwards, if they're there and it's just not at all what they expected, then sooner or later, they're going to leave, and it's going to cause you a lot more pain than if you had just been transparent up front. Okay, so that's on transparency. Next one, hire people smarter than you. Okay, now we all recognize Albert Einstein here. Obviously a very smart guy from a scientific perspective and from a mathematical perspective. Now, has anybody here recognized this guy on the right? No? Not Austin Powers? No? Okay, so it's actually Richard Branson, the founder and CEO of Virgin Airlines and all the different Virgin companies. So here he was as a very groovy guy in the late 60s in London. I wish I could pull off that grooviness. But now he's brilliant in a different way, right? Now he actually had a lot of problems in school. In fact, Einstein even had some problems in school too, but most people would consider Einstein's sort of general brilliance in terms of math or science. Branson, never a good student, but he has a brilliance and a genius in terms of being an entrepreneur, being a marketer, being a business person, right? So there's a different kind of genius that Branson has. And when you're building your teams, it's always good to kind of recognize different kinds of intelligence, different kinds of different talent that people can bring to the table. Jack Welch, who used to be the CEO of General Electric, said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you've got a real problem, right? If you're a manager and you've got 5 or 10 people on your team, and you're smarter than every one of them, then he says you've really screwed up in terms of hiring. Why? Because suddenly the burden of the whole team is carried on you as the person who's the smartest person in the room. Whereas if you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, then it's a lot easier to make decisions. I've consistently hired people smarter than me in my career, and it's great to manage a team like that because you get great ideas, and it's fun to manage a team like that, and the pressure for you as a manager is much less. It takes a certain sort of humility to do that, that you don't have to have all the answers, but that the answers can come from the entire team. So that's hiring people smarter than you. Okay. Next, value soft skills, and again, this is all under evaluating. I have Sonia Sotomayor here, who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was a little girl. She's speaking to a group of other young girls who also were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And by soft skills, I mean, for example, emotional intelligence, leadership, communication skills, integrity, honesty, teamwork. So these are skills that are very important to the success of a team. They're not always so obvious. They don't always jump out on a resume. Although sometimes in a resume you are going to see stuff on leadership, you're going to see stuff on teamwork, on awards that people win. And these are important skills to look for. I think we've all seen, or we've worked in companies where you have someone who's very brilliant, but they're just sort of a jerk. And working with someone like that is just not much fun. It's not much fun, and it's actually a very negative thing for the team. So soft skills, I think, is something that I always look for in teams, and it really pays off in terms of developing leaders from the people that you hire. Okay, now here I say, again, this is under evaluation, this is sort of the back channel references. And by back channel, of course, when you think about it, the traditional thing is that you're about to make a job offer to someone, they give you 3 references for people who love them, you call them up, they all say, yes, we love this person, and then, not very insightful, okay? Now, in those conversations, usually I will say, okay, I'm about to make a job offer to Corey. What can you tell me about her so I can help set her up for success once she starts at the company? Now, that's a fair question to ask, and I've gotten great feedback over the years asking that kind of question. But by back channel, I mean where you're actually checking on references of people, and they have not provided this reference for you. Okay, and of course, with the miracle of LinkedIn, it is easier than ever to do that, where you see, okay, here's someone I know who knows this person who's interviewing with me. Let me check in with them and say, hey, I'm interviewing so-and-so. Do you think she's any good? Would you hire her based on what you know about her? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses? And it's a great way to get information on a person. And I think there's nothing unethical about that. I mean, it's okay. It's just like real life. It's just, LinkedIn makes it very easy to do. And of course, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go to a person's boss at her current employer and say, hey, so-and-so is interviewing for a job. That's crazy. You would never do that. But if there's someone that you can check who's neutral, who can, keep it quiet that this person is interviewing, but who can give you information on what's it like to work with them, then that's very helpful. And you can do that early on in the process. I mean, there are situations where I've seen the resume of a candidate, and I realized that they worked at a company where I knew someone, and I was able to ping that person, and the person said, he's not very good, I wouldn't hire him. And so by doing that, I saved my team and myself all the effort of interviewing this candidate. Instead of going through the whole process and then kind of getting to resumes and referrals at the end, instead of getting to references at the end, right at the front, I was able to eliminate this candidate and save my company and my team a lot of time. Okay. Now, this is very important in terms of the evaluation process, and this is called a debriefing on candidates. So the debrief, let's be clear about this. This is when you've got the people who are on your interviewing team here. Okay, Erica, Jan, Kiana, Anil, and Jim, that's me here. So these are all the people who interviewed candidate X, right? Every one of us has interviewed these candidates. We've asked different questions because we're very clearly orchestrated in terms of who's interviewing whom. And then at the end, what we do is we get in the same room and we bring in our own rankings, kind of like the Olympics, right? So we bring in our own rankings of the candidate on a scale of 1 to 10. And there's 2 criteria here. One is ability to do the job, and the other is cultural fit. Now, ability to do the job is sort of what we typically think of in terms of skills, experience, education, and this is on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. Cultural fit is quite interesting. Now, cultural fit, I don't mean anything, has to do with race or gender, ethnicity, or any of the things you could get sued at in terms of hiring practices. That's not the spirit of that anyway. What cultural fit is about is, do they share our values? Are they a good fit on our team? Are we going to get along well with them? if we're working until 10 o'clock on Friday nights because we're so passionate about our product and about our startup, are they going to be excited about doing that as well? And there's some companies where the culture is very aggressive and very in your face and very confrontational, and that's just the way it is. And there's other companies which are very much more politically correct, people are nice to each other, nobody calls anybody else out on anything. And there's pros and cons to both of those, to each one of those. But that is the culture of the company. And I've seen people who are very talented, they might be, like here, a 9 on ability to do the job, but a cultural fit, maybe they're just a 5. The most obvious example, I think, is you've got someone who is very talented, and you're at a startup and you're interviewing for a position in a startup, and you're interviewing someone, and you might say, well, where else are you interviewing? And they might say, well, I'm interviewing with your startup, and I'm interviewing with Facebook and with Google. And when I hear that, it's like, well, look, there's nothing wrong with Facebook or Google, but if you want to work at a company with 5,000 employees or 20,000 employees, you're probably not a right cultural fit for working at a startup with 5 people in some dingy warehouse in South Market in San Francisco, right? So that's a simple example of where there's maybe not a cultural fit, even though the ability to do the job could have been just fine. Now what I do is I have everybody come into the room as part of this debrief. I say, don't tell anybody in advance what your scores are for the candidate. I have people write down the scores sort of in secret as they come into the room. And then on a whiteboard I say, okay, Erica, ability to do the job, 6, 8, Jan, what do you think? 5 and 7, Kiana, what do you think of candidate X? She says 8 and 8, we go down the line. Then what we do is we say, okay, interesting, now let's compare notes here. Anil, you gave this person a 9 on ability to do the job, and Jan, you only gave him a 5. Why is that? Can you talk about that, please? And that's where the conversation starts. And in doing this, you find out what did they ask. Now, these people ask different questions as well. So Jan might have asked different questions than Anil did, and so you start uncovering different aspects of the candidate. And that is a very fruitful conversation in terms of finding out, what did you think about this person? What do you not? Oh, I didn't hear that. Sometimes you'll hear that people are contradicting themselves or they're telling different stories. So it's that conversation you have in comparing the differences which is really interesting. The goal is not to change the other person's opinion. You don't do a voting afterwards. It's not like you have to agree on it. It's the conversation that's useful. And I've seen very talented Silicon Valley executives who've been very successful at startups for 20 years. And for the first time, they worked with me on using this process. And they said, wow, Jim, when I went into that room, I thought I wanted to hire that candidate. And after we went through this debrief process, I realized they actually weren't that good after all. So this really works. It's a very effective method, and it's part of a cleanly orchestrated process. Okay. Now, going to the last part here in terms of inspiring, this is how you close the candidate, right? You need to inspire them and find out what does inspire them. Some people are inspired by making a lot of money. Some people are inspired about changing the world. Some people are inspired about finding a cure for cancer. Some people are inspired about something because they had a member of their family who had some sort of health challenges, or maybe they passed away as a result of something. Some people just want to live the Silicon Valley dream. So whatever it is, you need to figure out in the interviewing process what inspires this person, what really gets them excited. And you need to tap into that, and when you do, then they're going to want to come on and they're going to be really excited about the opportunity. I think it's easy to think that all you have to do is pay a person enough money, and if you just do that, then they'll come on and work for you. And compensation is important, and for some people it's more important than others. But I find that if you can find out what really inspires a person, then compensation is much less important. People are much more excited about working on cool things, being excited about the role that the impact that the company has in the world. So it's really your responsibility to find out what is inspiring to that person, and then make sure that you tap into that when you're closing them and when you're getting them to come onto your team. Okay. So very quickly, here's the whole process that I just went through. We have the whole process here for success, for hiring, scoping. We have some points: sourcing, evaluating, and closing. So that's the whole quick summary here. I'm going to give you some information later on how I can email you a copy of this, in addition to the stuff we're about to cover on the second half. Now, any questions from anybody? Yes, in the back there, please.
I do have a question. So, from what I understand, I could be mistaken. Technically, culturally fitting with a company and being passionate don't necessarily do the same thing. So, assuming you have a candidate that's the same, let's say there are two candidates, they're the same level in terms of their ability to do the job. One might be more passionate about what they're doing, but one might seem to fit better with the company. What's your suggestion for between those two options?
Right. So between someone who has passion and someone who has cultural fit, right? I would go for the cultural fit. Now, hopefully, there's a cultural fit because they are passionate about what you're doing. So they're not completely mutually exclusive. But I know that there's some people they're very good in job interviews. You know, I mean, I've interviewed for jobs before. Well, honestly, I was not a very good fit, but I was very passionate. I was like, yeah, I really want to work here, and I'm pumped up, and I want to do this. And even no matter how much I was jumping up and down and passionate about it, it was not really a good fit. You can fake passion for a job interview, right? You can be really pumped up and excited and enthusiastic for 3 hours or 5 hours or whatever. But in terms of the reality of, okay, you can't fake that being amped up day in, day out when you actually get into the reality of the job. Whereas cultural fit, hopefully if you're looking into that, that's harder to fake. I mean, if you say, why are you interviewing with Google and Facebook when we're a 5-person startup? Or why is it that every company you're interviewing with has to do with healthcare, except us, because we're not doing healthcare. It's those kind of things that are much harder to fake if you ask the right questions in the interviewing process. But that was a very good question. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? No? Okay, good. All right, so that was the first part in terms of hiring, getting people in the door. Now what we're going to do is we get into the second part in terms of how to set people up for success, which is another way of saying, how do you manage people? How do you get the best performance out of them? Okay, now does anybody recognize any of the people here? Okay, whoops, I'm sorry, this was my this is my laptop doing the update of what I'm doing later on. Let me close out that, and let me do this. View, whoops, I need to go here. All right, all right, hopefully that won't happen again soon. If we can, we'll edit that out, we'll see. So, okay, so let's start again. So this is the part in terms of how to set up people for success. Now, some of you might recognize this picture is sort of old. It's actually probably about 40 years old. But this is Lou Alcindor, who later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, generally considered to be the greatest basketball player ever. And then over here we've got John Wooden, who is his coach. John Wooden, generally considered to be the greatest basketball coach ever, perhaps the greatest coach in sports anywhere. Just an amazing guy. He wrote a book, Wooden on Leadership, which I highly recommend. It's an incredible, very sort of focused book in terms of how to get great performance out of his teams. And whoops, I'm sorry. And Wooden is just amazing. He won 10 national championships as the coach for UCLA, 7 in a row from 1967 to 1973. Longest record for consecutive wins in basketball games for a college team. Just amazing. And he was able to get incredible performance out of his teams. And what I'm going to go over is some of his principles and some of the others that I've collected over the years in terms of how to set people up for success. But the idea is, as a manager, your responsibility is to set your people up for success. Right? As a manager, your responsibility is to set your people up for success. And that's what you should always be thinking about as you're leading a team. Now, you see the sort of format here of how I like to set things up. So we got how to motivate people, how to enable them, how to train them properly, and then how to communicate as the sort of the underlying basis for all this success. Now, here we've got, first of all, motivating is that you have to be motivated and you have to help people be motivated. Here we have a picture of Cesar Chavez. Obviously, he was very motivated to help his people and improve the condition of their lives here as founder of the United Farm Workers movement. And he was able to motivate people as well to follow his leadership in order to mobilize for a political cause that these people were passionate about. So this is what I call wanting to do the job. He wanted to do his job, and he got other people excited about wanting to do their jobs or wanting to participate in his movement. Okay? And as a manager, you want to be able to figure out what motivates the people on your team. Now, just a couple minutes ago, I was talking about what inspires people, and this is really very much the same thing. What inspires them, what motivates them. Now, if you're building a team on your own, it's cool because you get to hire people one by one, and you build a sort of a team in your own image of what you think you need in order to be successful on that team. However, there are times when you will inherit a team, or you'll come into a new job, and there's already people who are going to be reporting to you. Maybe they're great, maybe they're not great. In any case, what you have to do as quickly as possible is find out what motivates these people. Is it work-life balance? Are they trying to build a career? Are they going to hang out for a couple of years and then do a startup? Whatever it is, you need to learn what that is as fast as possible so you can understand what motivates them, and you can be the best manager possible to keep them motivated in that role. All right, now here under Enable, we've got a chainsaw and what are these over here? Scalpel? Right, yeah. So in terms of enabling, it literally means that they can do the job. They have the ability to do the job. Now the reason why I chose this is that if you had to undergo open heart surgery, you would really hope that the surgeon has a scalpel here and they don't have a chainsaw in order to perform that surgery, right? It's kind of a grisly image there. But the idea is that in startups, people sometimes don't have the right tools at all. And it's important, I know that for startups you have to be cost conscious, you have to watch your pennies, you need to be very careful of how you spend your money, but you need to be thoughtful about giving your people the best tools you possibly can for a great return on investment in those tools. A very simple example is, I remember I worked at a startup where the CEO was very frugal, didn't want to spend money on anything, but he found out about some research which said that instead of having like one monitor on a desktop, if you had a monitor and then you had another monitor here, that people had two monitors rather than one, he found out that people would be 30 to 40% more productive and efficient in their jobs by just having two monitors rather than one. So guess what? Within 2 days, everyone in the company had two monitors. And this is a company where they didn't want to spend money on anything. But the CEO recognized that there's a great return on investment of efficiency by just having two monitors rather than one for people. So think about that in terms of the tools that you're giving to the people at your company so they can be as efficient as possible. Be thoughtful about the return on investment you can get from that. All right. Next, in terms of training, okay? Here, I don't like acronyms just to be cute, but I think the term GEMS actually makes sense here under training. So know how to do their job. You need to make sure that people know how to do their jobs in terms of what the goals are, their expectations, their metrics, and their skills, right? Goals, expectations, metrics, and skills, GEMS. Now let's take a look at this for a second. So under goals, we've got a famous Mexican soccer player here. So under goals, as you're training people on your team, you need to be clear about what those goals are. Okay, what does success look like for them? Generally, I found the rule of thumb is not more than 5 goals at a time. If you can knock out those 5 goals, you can add 2 more, you can change them to 2 more after that. I also remember I was at a startup where the CEO said, on my first day of work, I said, what advice do you have to give me to be successful here? And he said, the most important thing is knowing what not to do. The most important thing is knowing what not to do. At any given time, there's 20 things that are cool and interesting and cute. 17 of them are kind of nonsense, and 3 of them are really going to move the needle. Now you could say, Jim, okay, well, what are those 3? Well, it depends. And the challenge of a great leader and a great manager is to be able to figure out what those 3 are and keep the team really focused on what those 3 are. So that is, and then to make those the goals for the people, and of course to keep them focused on that as much as possible. So you need to train them on what those goals are, be really clear about that. Then in terms of expectations, we talked a little bit about this before about transparency. Let people know what is expected of them in terms of the hours that they need to put in. Are you working from home? Are you working remotely? Just be clear with people about, I used to hire people and I said, look, I expect at least 50 hours a week in this job. That's just normal in Silicon Valley. And I would tell people that in the interviewing process. And I would remind them of that if they came onto my team and they weren't working 50 hours a week. Now you could say it's not about face time, it's about input, it's about output. I get it, but all things being equal, if you're working hard, that was the minimum that I expected from people. And that helped just be really clear about what I expected from my team. Now, also expectations can be about the quality of the work that you do and sort of how you do it. And a simple example is, for example, you might be doing you might ask someone to do some analysis on your team. And you say, look, this is internal only, we just want a quick and dirty of this. Don't spend any more than 2 hours doing this. And that's very helpful to hear that from your manager. Don't spend any more than 2 hours doing this, quick and dirty, it's internal. It's also helpful if you tell someone, you know what, this is a really important presentation for an important new client we have. We could earn a lot more money from these guys if we do a great presentation, and it's got to be perfect. It's got to be flawless. If you need to spend the next 3 days working on this, that's fine. That's helpful too. That's what I mean about expectations, which can be very helpful guidance as you are managing people. All right. Now, also in terms of training, we've got metrics here. This is the M of GEMS, is the metrics. And, you know, we're awash with data. There's more data than there ever has been. Pretty much every internet company, every startup has got tons of data and metrics that they're tracking. And my point is that it's important for a new person who's coming on the team to just be really clear about what are the metrics that we care about. You know, lots of people get reports like this all the time. And as the manager, as part of training them and setting them up for success, it's important to say, you know what, there's a lot of numbers here, but we care about this, we care about this, and we care about this. And by the way, your goals are to manage and hit these certain metrics. So that should be pretty clear. And you can say, look, you might come up with other ideas, other metrics that are important, and that's okay. But first, just start with these key metrics. Okay, so keep those metrics in mind. And then in terms of skills, okay, there's the hard skills and there's also the soft skills. The hard skills are what we typically think of in terms of, you know, education, training, experience, you know, what software languages do you know? Those are sort of the typical hard skills. Soft skills, I touched on that a little bit before. Soft skills can be, for example, are you the kind of person who takes responsibility for yourself? Are you always learning and growing? Are you a really good communicator? Do you have great teamwork skills? Can you handle the pressure of the work, and can you find some sort of a work-life balance? Are you fun to be around? Do people enjoy being on the team with you? These are all soft skills which a good interviewing process can uncover, and they're a very important part. Now, as a manager, you can also train people on this. As a manager, you can train people on how to do better management of their emails and their inbox. You can train them on how to do better time management. You can train them on how to do better work-life balance so they're more productive and they're not just spending all the time in the office burning themselves out. The leadership consulting I do, there's various aspects of it, and one of the things I do is in terms of this sort of training on soft skills in terms of how to build a higher performance team, being able to use a lot of these for not just the hard skills, but also the soft skills. Okay, now just here for a second, I'm going to take a sip of water. You can take a look at this gentleman here. Some of you might know this as Andy Grove, who, and I'll talk about the penguins in a second. So Andy Grove, amazing person, an immigrant from Hungary, was running from the communists as a little boy. Was running from the Nazis as a little boy in Budapest, then was running from the communists later on, and then escaped in 1956, came to the United States, learned how to speak English through lip reading, because he had a hearing defect. Was one of the founders of Intel, became the CEO in 1987, and was Time Man of the Year in 1997 because of the huge impact that was going on from Intel and from the whole internet revolution that was taking place at that time. Now, Andy is a very tough guy, an incredibly successful businessman. The value of Intel went up, I think, 2,400% while he was CEO of Intel. Just an incredibly successful manager and leader. But a very tough guy, right? A man who had a very tough personal story as an immigrant, but was able to be incredibly successful in this company, in this country. And he wrote a book called High Performance, I think, High Performance Management or High Output Management, one of those titles. But what he did is he talked about the importance of the weekly one-on-one meeting with the people who reported to him. And I've had, ever since then, ever since reading that book, I've done a lot of weekly one-on-one meetings, both with people I reported to and people who reported to me. I like to go for a walk, if possible, unless I like the image of the penguins here. Besides, penguins are always cute. So the idea of a weekly one-on-one walk is that it has a lot of benefits. One is it gets you out of the office. Northern California has a beautiful climate, and it's sort of nice to be outside and get some fresh air. Moves your body around, so it's actually good for your health. And it's known that people feel better when they're going for a walk. They can think more creatively. They can relax. And this is just a great sort of contrast to where people are sort of at their desks just pounding away at their computers all the time. And on top of that, this is a great way to go over how people are doing. And in the one-on-ones, of course, you can still go over the metrics. With the iPads, you can pull this up easier than it's ever been possible to do. So definitely in the one-on-ones, go over the metrics and the goals and everything that's important there. But in addition, I have a practice of asking 3 questions or making 3 comments that I find very effective in the one-on-one meetings. And this is very important. Okay. The first question is when I'm doing a one-on-one meeting with someone who's reporting to me, I'll say, okay, what is your job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10? Right? What is your job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 is you hate this job and you're resigning right now. 10 is this is the most amazing, incredible opportunity you could possibly have, and it's just the greatest thing in the world. So, and people will say, okay, well, Jim, my job satisfaction this week is a 7. I said, really, a 7? Well, last week it was a 9. What happened? And they say, well, not happy about this. This is kind of frustrating me. I'm having problems with a coworker here, and that's why I've gone from a 9 to a 7 the last week. I say, oh, okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. Okay, here's an idea of what you can do here. Let me help you out with this. I'll send an email to someone and try to follow up, and then here's some advice on how to solve this issue. And then the next week you go over it again and you see how they're doing it from, bouncing from a 7 to a 9 or whatever. But it's great to sort of have a pulse of their job satisfaction. The other question I then say is, the next comment I have is, okay, I will tell you how I think you're doing on a scale of 1 to 10, right? So I will say that I think you're doing a 6. And they might say, 6? Why that? I say, well, here's one thing where you drop the ball. I was expecting this, and you really didn't do the level of quality of work that I expected. And here's one other thing where I think you can do better. So they're telling me how they are in terms of satisfaction. I'm giving them very direct feedback in terms of how I think they're doing and whether they're meeting my expectations or not. And they can then say, well, wait, Jim, you don't understand something. This is what happened here, and you're misinformed on this, and here's more information. So it's just it's the springboard for a good discussion around their performance. Okay, then the third thing is I ask them, how am I doing as your manager on a scale of 1 to 10? Right? And people might say, okay, Jim, you're doing a 6, or you're doing a 10, or you're doing whatever, and they'll explain to me where I can be better as their manager. Right? So I'm giving them very direct feedback in terms of how they can be better on a scale of 1 to 10. They're giving me direct feedback on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm finding out, just generally how they're doing and how they're feeling about the work. And I found that this is very effective. I find that the 1 to 10 scale is very nice as well, because people can use a lot of words, and words are nice, but a number really is very quantifiable by definition, right? And if someone goes from a 9 to a 7, or from a 7 to a 4, you can see exactly where it's bouncing from week to week. And I find that very, very effective. So this is what I do in the one-on-one meetings. All right. Now, just as a summary here, so we got setting up people for success. I talked about motivation. I talked about enabling them. I talked about training, knowing how to do their job with the goals, expectations, metrics, and skills. The basis of this is communication with the 3 questions and comments here. And what I'll do is, if you want to get my 2-page summary of those summary slides that I just showed, then email me. My email address is jim@jimmccarthy.biz. I think you can see that there. jim@jimmccarthy.biz. And please include your first and your last name, your company name, and what you do there, what your title is. And I'd be delighted to send that to you as sort of, I won't charge you for it, it's okay. And it'll be something that you can use, hopefully, for your reference as you think about the principles that I've gone over today. All right. And also, just please fill out the feedback forms that I've handed out, so I can always be getting better in my presentations. And I also have a 1-10 question there, and just be as candid as possible. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks to Latino Startup Alliance for being part of their first Innovator Summit. Muchas gracias a todos. And that's it. Thank you very much.